Yodel, hee hoo. Hey, this is Lars Light from the Somm Journal, practicing my mountain fruit yodeling. Happy to be here with Somm Session on behalf of the Somm Journal, SommFoundation, and Treasury Wine Estates. I'm here with, who am I with, Jillian?
Hi, Lars. I'm Jillian Balance, Master Sommelier and National Educator for Treasury Wine Estates. And we are so thrilled to be here today to kick off an amazing discussion and tasting of Beringer Private Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon and talk about the virtues of mountain fruit, these majestic mountain vineyards and what they bring to the final blend. So really happy to be here with you all today and continue this amazing program, which gives people an opportunity to win money, a spot at our incredible crush camp during harvest next year. So we're very, very excited to be engaged with you all, staying in touch with the sommelier community who are so near and dear to our hearts. And I'm going to kick it back over to Lars to kind of give us a little bit of background on mountain vineyards and their influence on viticulture and vinification here in Napa Valley. So
thank you,
Lars.
Jillian. Thank you very much. I love playing the role of mountain man. I'm much more of a mountain man than a seaside guy. Jillian, tell me one favor though. This is one of your shots. Tell us, where is this? Where was this taken? This beautiful mountain.
Oh yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that is Spring Mountain. So yeah, as you can see, a lot of the vineyards are sitting way above the fog line, which gives them a little bit more sunlight. But Spring Mountain's a really interesting AVA, very small, sits right above the town of St. Helena, primarily volcanic soils and sedimentary rock. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's pretty dramatic. And this area has actually been cultivated since the 1870s. And I believe the Beringer brothers were some of the first to plant vineyards up on this really cool site.
That is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Pretty heroic, as they would say. So the context of, mountain fruit is something that's taken place around the world. It's been appreciated since time immemorial. But in this particular context today, we're talking about Napa Valley. And so Napa Valley, just to lay out things in terms of the climate, we know Napa has considered to be a pretty Mediterranean climate. You have an inversion effect with the valley floor and the mountains, and a nice long growing season because of some of the mitigating effects there of the weather coming in off the bay and the way the different altitudes and soils play.
That's right. It was 33 degrees this morning.
Wow. That's crazy.
But it'll spike up to the 60s by noon, no problem. So huge temps.
We didn't have that cold weather in New York today. So I like this map because we always talk about Napa Valley. Napa, when we say Napa, refers to the city. Napa Valley refers to the winemaking area. But if you look at this little topographical map, you realize that it's not all about valley floor. If you think about all the AVAs that are within Napa Valley, almost half of them are mountain. So let's not underestimate the whole valley side. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's valleys, there's hillsides. Where there's valley floor, there's mountains. And so that's something very important. And you see that the width of the valley floor obviously has the heartland, but there is some very significant territories growing up in the mountains. It's all part of the terroir and the game there. And as you know, to either side of Napa Valley, you have the Mayacamas Mountains looking to the west toward Yountville, and the Vaca Range looking to the east, the Stag's Leap districts. Those are the two main areas, and you've got some outcroppings in between, but a lot of mountain to talk about. It's not just valley floor. And within that area, you have different elevations. It varies tremendously, and those variations all have tremendous impact on the fruit. So you see Mount St. Helena, 4,000 feet, Spring Mountain, 2,600 feet, Mount Veeder, similar 2,600 feet, Atlas Peak, and the valley floor is anywhere between sea level and 750 feet. So a lot of variation from valley floor to mountaintop where fruit can be grown. and express different character. Temperatures are going to vary pretty widely. It's not just one standard. You've got, as Lynn just mentioned, a tremendous diurnal shift, tremendous variation. You've got cooler weather. Average rainfall in the mountains can be a little bit higher, a lot higher, actually, almost double than it is down on the valley floor. So there's huge variation, wonderful diversity, I would call it. Then there's, of course, my little cheat sheet, so I don't have to look down at my notes too much. But just to remember things like the concept of mountain fruit in Napa Valley really started in the 1870s, long before Prohibition and phylloxera were really on the scene and creating a jam. The wine growing business was booming, and farmers said, we got to plant more vineyards. And they said, well, let's move up. And they started moving up into the hills, and they realized it was a real pain. It was a real challenge, because you couldn't, not that mechanization was a big thing in the 1870s, but didn't offer the possibility of mechanization. It made manual labor a lot more intensive, a lot harder to do. And they wondered if it was worth it, but then they started getting the results and they said, wow, this is pretty distinct. We're getting something pretty special up here. So it could be worth all that work to go literally uphill. The weather, as we know, up on mountain fruit, you're going to have cooler overall temperatures. So it's going to be cool climate fruit. You're going to have a greater diurnal shift than you have even in the valley, because the sun coming in during the day, but then cooling things off tremendously at night. You'll be above the fog line, as we saw from that beautiful picture that we opened it up with. The sunlight is going to be much more intense. So the phenolics are going to be heavier or more intense on the mountain fruit. And you're going to have great exposure to breezes, and breezes definitely affect the fruit. It affects the whole photosynthetic process. So the vine's going to shut down because they're cooler. They're going to react a little bit differently. The soils are going to be leaner, a lot less fertile. Valley floor, we love valley floor fruit, but it's going to be much more lush. You can grow, and I don't mean this to be insulting at all, but you can grow almost anything on the valley floor because the floor is so fertile. Winemakers there have a challenge of building character, because you're always going to get fruit on the valley floor. The question is, what are you going to get in those leaner soils up the mountain? It's going to be rockier, so you're going to have an added minerality, and the soils are going to be well drained, so the vines are going to have to reach a little bit deeper, which is going to build character. And that's what we're looking for. There's not going to be a lot of vigor in a valley, in a mountainside or a hillside vineyard. The vines are going to struggle a little bit. And I always used to like to say, my mother always taught me that a good mother knows that to bear good fruit, you have to suffer. And you see that with the vine. Vines that suffer a little bit more won't be as prolific, won't have as high of a yield. But what they will bear fruit with, they're going to concentrate all their energies into that fruit, and the fruit is going to have tremendous character. The berries are going to be smaller, and a smaller berry, of course, means a greater proportion of skin to pulp. So more anthocyanins, more tannins, more extracts, more polyphenols, and so forth, more resveratrol. The resulting wines are going to be dark because of that, but they're going to have a little bit of a rustic edge, not as plush, not as lush, a little bit rustic. They're going to tend to be more savory, maybe have some secondary notes like earth, minerality, spices, a lot more complexity overall. And I like to kind of close with this slide. This is, with no offense to the people that tend these vines, it's beautiful to those of us who understand what great wine growing country should look like, but really it's not, architect or a architectural design or a gardening design company might not want to put this out there because it's not the prettiest. The vines look like they're struggling a little bit, but there's a lot of character in there, and you can see it. It's not lush, it's not plush, it's not high vigor, but the fruit that's going to come from these vines is going to be spectacular. And speaking about spectacular fruit and resulting wines, Jillian, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk about this beautiful wine that we're going to be tasting together today.
Thank you, Lars. That was an incredible overview of the mountain sites, and certainly the influence that those high altitude vineyards can give. I'm just curious, if you were a farmer, a grape grower, Would you rather grow fruit up on the mountains, or would you rather grow fruit on the valley floor?
Me personally,
Or
I'd be up
both?
in the mountains anytime.
Maybe
Like I
you'd like
said,
to have both.
that's not such a bad thing. The best of both worlds. That is absolutely ideal. And I think
Which
that's the way the smart growers play it.
absolutely, which brings us to the conversation surrounding that of Beringer Private Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, first produced in 1978, and ever since just achieving some great accolades and really thought of to kind of be one of those real iconic wines of Napa Valley. And yes, there are reasons behind that.
Yeah.
1 second.
And to your point, Jillian, the you can have fruit from a hillside. You're going to need to treat the fruit from the top of the hill a little bit different from the bottom of the hill. And certainly if you're combining valley floor fruit and mountain fruit, you're going to have to treat both of those a little different too, because you're going to get very different results. You cannot just have a cookie cutter approach. So the key is balancing all that out. And that's the skill of the winemaker.
Such a great point, and really the point behind the mastery over the decades of this incredible wine. This is just a little bit of a timeline, and that gentleman, those two gentlemen to the right, up in the corner is Meyer Nightingale, and down in the lower right-hand corner is Ed Sabragia, the two masterminds behind creating a wine that specifically spoke to some great vineyard sites here in Napa Valley, and voila, calling it private reserve, kind of brilliant. And in the 70s, Myron and Ed really kind of started out with our viticulturalist at the time, Bob Steinhauer, looking for the best quality fruit to make this wine. And they tasted some Cabernet Sauvignon from the Chabot Vineyard, which is off of Glass Mountain Road. Not really a mountain site, but that was in fact the original source for the first vintage of 1978 private reserve Cabernet. So we've had 30 plus years of great success in producing this wine. And I think a couple of things happened in the late 70s. Napa Valley was post-prohibition, world wars, economic depression. There was a lot more investment starting to come into the area. And I think that emulating the great wines of Bordeaux was certainly at the forefront, as was winning these global or world competitions and really busting out on the scene as a world-class wine growing region, something that it had enjoyed in the late 1800s, as you had mentioned. And just kind of, I kind of think of it as like the Renaissance era, even though Beringer had always been there since 1876. So, and right about that time was also when Robert Parker started reviewing wine and immediately loved this expression of Cabernet Sauvignon. There were a couple things that Ed was doing radically different from other winemakers in the Valley, which were, one was harvesting the fruit at a slightly riper, higher Brix level. Also employing 100% brand new French oak barrels, which very few wineries at the time were doing. A lot were still using those big old redwood tanks. So he did a couple of things that I think shifted the style of Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon into that, slightly riper expression of fruit. And yes, we were very quick to kind of be at the forefront of that transition for Napa Valley. And so just if we looked at the collection of vineyards that make up private reserve, a very enviable collection, some of the greatest terroirs here in Napa. And I think Lars did an amazing job of kind of expressing that diversity that exists here and really highlighting the fact that a lot of Napa Valley is actually mountain vineyards, and so true. And also, so Ed and Bob Steinhauer and Myron were the first to, really start to branch out and create a blend that was based not just on mountain fruit, but also valley floor, and kind of take the benefits of both of those terroirs and blend them together into one very unique, I think, an unimitated style, an unimitated wine in the world. And so we have certainly mountain vineyards that provide really, like Lars was saying, the concentration, the structure. So finding those really great mountain sites was really important to them in the late 70s, early 80s. And we have some very long-term contracts with the owners and growers, or we own them ourselves. So we've had many, many decades of experience of working with these amazing vineyards. So about 62% of what goes into private reserve, at least for the 2017 vintage, is Howell Mountain. So Steinhauer Ranch, Bancroft, and we have some beautiful pictures to show you of those vineyards. About 5% Spring Mountain from the Marston Vineyard, which is right over pushing up against that western edge of the Mayacamas. A little bit from Diamond Mountain, which is north of Spring Mountain. A little bit different soil type, a little bit steeper, I would say, in terms of our vineyards. And about 1% Mount Veeder. The rest is being sourced from our home vineyard, which is right behind the Rhine House. If you have been up to Napa Valley and have visited the Behringer property, that's the first thing you see is the Rhine House that was built by Frederick back in the late 1880s. And it's such a profound, impactful house that sits right off of Main Street in St. Helena. And I think really represents kind of the history here of Napa Valley. So this is Steinhauer Ranch, very beautiful picture here. And this is around 30 acres in size, mostly red volcanic clay that you can see there. So a really significant contributor to private reserve since 1993. And named after our chief viticulturalist. It used to be called the Tré-Coline Vineyard, but we purchased it and renamed it to pay homage to Bob Steinhauer, who really was pivotal in kind of bringing this collection of vineyards together. Also instrumental in our kind of foray down to the Central Coast to really develop some great sites down there in Paso Robles and Santa Barbara County. Wonderful guy. And so, yeah, that's a nice contributor. And you can see how different the mountain views are from the valley floor. And this is another one of our Howell Mountain vineyards. This is Bancroft Vineyard. And you can see here, much more undulating and sloped. This is kind of halfway up Howell Mountain on the eastern side. And you can see too, the little bit different soil type, right? It's a little bit whiter. This is all kind of decomposed volcanic ash. So Howell Mountain is made up predominantly of like these red volcanic soils and this whiter decomposed volcanic ash, which we have nicknamed tufa. And it's very easy to break apart with your hands. So the vines can really reach down very deep for their nutrients. And like Lars said, that struggle exists. And because of that, you do naturally control yields, right? You've got these amazing sunlight temperatures and then this huge shift at night. So really, really elongated growing season. And we'll probably pick these mountain sites close to 5 or 6 weeks later than some of the valley floor. And Howell Mountain is just such a unique, it was the first sub-appellation in Napa Valley, a really unique proposition and first cultivated by George Yount, because he received some land up there called the Rancho La Jotta land grant. And then it was purchased by Mr. Edwin Angwin in 1870, the entire mountain purchased from Isaac Howell, and the rest is history. But it is owned by the Seventh-day Adventist community of Angwin. And so purchasing vineyards here is a very, very tricky proposition. As you can see, they are highly protective of the surroundings. So, if you purchase 100 acres, you may only get to plant 20 of those 100 because they are very much into the preservation of the land and the mountains. So really unique proposition, very hard to access fruit in this area.
Well, one of the things I love about this picture, Lynn, is that number one, it's great to see the trees there, forest for biodiversity, but they're coniferous. So that tells you a lot about the height of this vineyard, right? You've got these coniferous trees that
Oh
obviously
yeah,
indicate
this
some height.
absolutely, and
Pine trees.
this is somewhere around, I want to say 1,800 feet above elevation.
Wow.
Sea level. So yeah, very high up, nosebleeder. And then this is another component. So we use 3 vineyards up on Hell Mountain. So Bancroft, Steinhauer, and the Pauley Vineyard, which actually used to be known as the Vogt Vineyard. You may have seen that from bottlings in years past, but it was purchased by the Pauley family. But we have been using this fruit since 2009, and it's a pretty small 15-acre vineyard, but really lovely qualities of fruit. And again, looking more at that kind of red volcanic soil. And this is another component over on Mount Veeder. So switching over to the western side to Lampyridae, which is also pretty high in elevation and mostly volcanic soil as well. Very, very steep terrain, lots of direct sunlight. So contrary to, we always say we harvest mountain vineyards later than anything else, this actually ripens pretty early because of that different sun exposure. So kind of a unique proposition, and I think really a nice component to the aromatics of the wine. And then we also have Marston Vineyard, which is over on Spring Mountain. So also pushing against the Mayacamas range, and first cultivated in the 1870s, I want to say. And I think that Jacob and Frederick Beringer, who were the founders of Beringer Winery, were some of the first to plant vineyards here. And also a very unique proposition with, you can see that kind of red volcanic clayish soils, steep, well-drained, and just perched right above the town of St. Helena. So some really unique sites. I had to put some pictures in of our valley floor vineyards, even though our discussion today is about mountain fruit. But Home Vineyard is actually Mark Beringer kind of calls it a mountain style vineyard, but on the valley floor. And you can see those steep terraces that are going up. That's really butting up right up to the Spring Mountain AVA, but it's actually St. Helena. And those are 50 beautiful Cabernet acres that are right behind the Rhine House, and certainly give us a little bit of that lush fruit component. This is the Chabot Vineyard on the eastern side off of the Silverado Trail, another great property. And then of course our Barrow Pit at Gamble Ranch. So this is a fairly newly planted vineyard right next to Screaming Eagle. And we're really, really excited about the quality of fruit that we're getting from this wine. So speaking of the wine, why don't we taste the 2017, Lars?
I thought you'd never ask. Of course I do.
Yeah. So yeah, this is always a pretty dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon. And you can see a little bit of Cab Franc made it into this blend, and a little bit of Merlot. So, high percentage of Cabernet Sauvignon, because we want this wine to have some really great ageability. And, the more Merlot, et cetera, that you put into the blend to soften it, I think, quicker it will be to mature. So really, again, we're looking at about 8 different vineyard sources, all harvested, vinified separately, aged in oak separately before the blend is composed, and then spending about 18 to 22 months in oak, depending on the vintage. And then we age the wine for another year before we even release it. So what do you think about the wine, Lars?
I love it. Now, this is a mix of mountain fruit and valley floor fruit?
It is. It's predominantly predominantly mountain fruit, but yeah, there's about 25% 100% valley floor fruit.
And I can see why the winemaker would do that, because there's an underlying lushness to it, especially on the attack. But then that beautiful minerality and earthiness comes out on the sides, and it finishes with this beautiful, clean, minerally aftertaste that's just gorgeous. It's got nice roundness to it. It's got good sapidity, as we say, nice savory character to it.
Well, I love hearing your opinion of the wine, but I would also love to hear, I don't know, maybe from the winemaking side. We haven't really talked about Mark Behringer, but he is a self-professed soil geek, the 8th chief winemaker in the history of Behringer, and also the great-great-grandson of Jacob, one of the founding fathers of Behringer Winery. So I'm sure he has a lot to say. Mark, are you here?
Yes, I just arrived, so I don't know what you've said in advance of my arrival, but I'm here now.
It was all good, Mark.
Yay!
I swear. Welcome.
Thank you for joining us, Mark. It's always an honor and a pleasure, and I always learn something new every time I hear you speak about this incredible wine. I didn't really tell any of the viewers earlier, but I'm sure you've heard me tell the story. I used to work at Windows on the World, and this was one of the first kind of cult Cabernet Sauvignons on our wine list from California. We had pages of private reserve, and I'm sure you have even more stories, having grown up here in Napa and now well into the journey of the evolution and the maintaining the incredible style of this wine. But I'll let you speak to that a little bit, as well as just maybe your thoughts on how is it different farming mountain fruit versus valley floor, and what it means to you as a winemaker. And do you have the wine, Mark?
I don't have the wine, unfortunately.
Oh, we didn't get the winemaker the wine?
No, well, I just had it last week, actually. I had a bottle at home, but I'm not at home right now, actually.
I have an extra bottle over here.
They don't have it here. They haven't brought it in yet.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I usually have to steal it out of my stash, and I didn't grab a bottle this morning, but I just had it last week, and so it's pretty fresh in my mind. It's actually been on my counter for a few days to be able to watch it open up. Being such a young wine, when you first pop it, it's a real brooding, dark, luscious Cabernet. So it does need to open up a little bit. And certainly over time, watching it over a few days, it really did open up nicely. But, my first experience with mountain fruit was really working with Duckhorn Vineyards. When I was a winemaker there, we had some beautiful assets up on Howe Mountain, and got to work with some of those like Stout and Candlestick vineyards. And right where the entrance to the Stout vineyard is, it's actually the driveway to Dunn Vineyards as well, very well-known Howe Mountain winemaker, is where Steinhauer is. And I remember always having to drive out of that driveway and look across at the big gate with the Behringer logo and go, gosh, I'll never have an opportunity to work with that vineyard because I am not a part of Behringer, and always working with Duckhorn, but was always envious of what was on the other side of that fence. And now today, flash forward many years to where I've been able to be now the chief winemaker at Behringer for what's my 6th vintage. It's really cool to be able to work with that vineyard directly. It's just as good or even better than I thought it was looking at it over the fence line, as is Bancroft up there as well. At the other end, I used to drive into the Lahota property because I bought some grapes out there, and have to go by the Bancroft vineyard as well. And I always was so envious because, Behringer controlled all of it. It wasn't like you could go in and say, hey, can I get 3 tons, 5 tons? I'll pay you whatever. We could make a tank, do a single vineyard wine. There was no option because Behringer would walk in and sign a lease for 35 years and forget it, So it's great to be that person on the other side of that lease, I got to say.
And you work pretty closely with Jim Burgess on managing. He manages all of those mountain vineyards, right?
Yeah, and Jim's got a bigger role than that now. He manages all of our northern region now. But he lives up there on Bancroft property, and he used to be the regional regional manager up here in the north part. And he has such experience with that site. It's a huge asset, because when we would go out and look at the fruit, and you're trying to project maybe when you're going to pick 3, 4, 5 days down the road, because trying to stage equipment in the mountains is more challenging than the valley floor as well. Getting hand pickers, because it's conditions that you really need to go up and down hills. We're only picking sections of the vineyard, because the rows might go up and over an undulating hill. We might only pick the top of the hill in the beginning, and then come back and pick the lower part, because they're so significantly different. And that could change from Monday when Jim and I were out there till maybe Thursday when he was actually going to mobilize. And so having Jim out there, living there, he would go out on an ATV in the evenings and taste the fruit and see if that ripening curve have kind of moved up the hill or down the hill, usually over the last couple days. So, and then I'd get a call, okay, we're going to bring in a couple more bins. I think that ripening curve has gone to here. And we would just pick sections and try to make a tank. He's like, what size tank do you have today? It's like 8 tons. Okay, we're going to get 8 tons out of the ripest section of Bancroft and bring it in today. As blocks don't matter. So it's really surgical style of picking.
Sounds like almost you're picking several vineyards in one.
It really is. I mean, if you look at the sections of the vineyard, kind of like the picture behind Lars there, that kind of topography creates these really different varying levels of ripeness. And you can try to maybe hit the balance of all of it, maybe try to get the riper stuff with the less ripe and combine it to get some more complexity. And sometimes we do that. But when we're trying to go for private reserve, we really want to get the very best ripe sections and hit them just right. We might even pick only one side of the vine in some cases because of shading and things like that. So having the ability to do that really allows you to kind of take a wine to the next level.
Now, I've had the great honor and privilege to taste alongside you all of the single vineyard components, because we do in fact bottle a very, very small amount of each, I think, to show the attributes that they bring to the final blend. So predominantly Howell Mountain, what do you think these little dollops of Diamond Mountain or Mount Veeder or Spring Mountain bring to the table for this blend?
They all bring, some element, and even the valley floor brings its element, right? But, it seems with the mountain fruit, of course, a little bit goes a lot further. Just like with some blending varieties like Petit Verdot, when we talk about how it influences a blend, mountain fruit can have such an impact very quickly. But we're making a wine that's structured. This is a wine for ageability. It's meant to be cellared. This is a wine for the ages. It is enjoyable now. Recommend decanting or leaving it on the counter like I did. But yeah, there you go. It really helps to open it up, because when they're youthful, they're a little bit arms and legs and trying to figure it out. But as they age, it all kind of comes together. And so we're using a lot of mountain fruit. I mean, Howell Mountain being the core, usually 60 plus, sometimes approaching 70% of the base wine is from Howell Mountain, from both Steinhauer, Bancroft, and also our grower vineyard up there, Polly, that used to be the boat vineyard. Right. But yeah, we bring in the Spring Mountain fruit from Marston, right up here, right behind where I'm sitting up here in the hills, which is more of a slate soil. It has more of a sedimentary evolutionary, geology evolution from it, because a lot of stuff around here is volcanic. The majority is volcanic. But we are in a very seismic area. There is shifting of plates, and some of the Mayacamas mountain range has some earth that was thrust upward through this tectonic action, and you get these basically soils that used to be sea bottom. So it has a really interesting impact when you bring it in, even at like 4 or 5%. It brings a minerality and kind of this old world kind of grippy tannin and more of that really dark fruit beyond even fruit to getting into like olives, like black olive or Timpanogos, something like that. And if we look at Mount Veeder, our Lamparity vineyard that we get fruit from up at 2,800 feet above sea level, that is just, the berries are so small and they are so dark when you go up there and look at them on the vine. They look literally black, not purple, they are black. And when they get into the fermenter, it's inky, it's dark. that's spicy and this really intense dark fruit. So you get that into the wine, you start putting in a little bit into the blend, it really can shift things really fast and start to dominate. So it's all about trying to get all of those in balance each vintage.
You must have to taste a lot of those wines to.
Yeah, at least it's Monday morning. My teeth don't look like I just crawled out of a grave or something.
Wait till Wednesday for that.
Yeah. Friday afternoon when I went home, my wife was like, yeah, go brush your teeth. Don't come near me. My teeth and gums were so stained. And luckily, actually one of the benefits of wearing masks right now is I can go to the grocery store and not have the people look at me like I'm really sick or something. Because it really does stain your whole mouth and palate.
Absolutely. That's when you break out the sparkling wine or, some white wine.
That's right.
Teeth a little bit. We have a couple questions that are coming through, but I'm going to ask you first before I forget, because I will. There's so many great questions. Is there something different that you're changing in the program of making Beringer Private Reserve? Maybe a couple points, because, everyone that's on the call, they're all professionals within the trade, sommeliers, buyers, and I'm sure that's probably a question that people want to hear about. So.
Yeah, sure. I mean, since when I arrived in 2015, obviously, was a little bit of pressure. I mean, having the 7 previous winemakers to me be basically the rock stars of the business. And having a brand that was so successful, a wine of the year in the Wine Spectator, consistent 95+ point scores from major critics. The first thing you do when you come to a program like that, at least this was my belief, is don't screw it up. Learn everything that you can and how we got here, and try to learn that first. And it's a battle I have with my wife sometimes in the kitchen. I'm like, if you're going to do a new recipe, do it by the recipe the first time, and then be creative. My wife likes to be completely creative the first time out of the chute with a new recipe, especially when there's guests coming over. It's like, okay, this is the time to just throw it all out there. No, I tried to, I learned as much as I could. I was really, lucky enough to have 6 months with Lori Hook. And she had been here obviously for 30 years, 15 under Ed Zabragia, and then another 15, of course, as chief winemaker herself. And so that's something we never get as winemakers. You're usually inheriting somebody's, skeletons in the closet, and there's tanks of stuff in the back that they never told anybody about, that kind of stuff. But Lori was right there with me. I tasted through the entire 13 vintage with her. We put the blend together. It allowed me to finish the 14s after she'd left, be able to blend them. But I also got to go through at least the majority of the 15, vintage of harvest with her. Being able to walk through the rows, taste grapes, talk about the blocks. This is how we do it here. This is how we do it there. And so it really allowed me to get that baseline. I was that sous chef in the kitchen, and then, okay, now you're chef de cuisine, here you go. And so on top of that, what we did is played around with some techniques that I had learned throughout my career, working at places like Duckhorn, Artesa, working with a lot of different varieties, and bringing in some wood fermentation, like pungeon barrels, where we take, the double-sized barrels, 500-liter containers, that we would take out one head and use it as an open-top fermenter. We brought in some optical sorting to play with. We looked at other extraction techniques. So we've been playing around with a lot of different things that I'd kind of learned throughout my time working, at other places. Something that hadn't been done here before, because literally Myron Nightingale trained Ed, who trained Lori. This was a vertically integrated system as well.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at, like, when we say you're the 8th chief winemaker since 1876, that is a testament to this kind of emeritus program that continues the traditions, but also, you, like you said, you're kind of employing some of your own techniques as well. And it really is, it's such an artisanal, real hands-on process that you have to be very involved with and super knowledgeable about not just the vineyards, but also from a winemaking standpoint. It's just amazing to me. So we have a question about what the challenges were in 2017.
Where do I start?
Yeah, right. I'll let you tackle that one. And then the other one is, does Beringer ever make 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, or is it always blended? I can only recall maybe one year that it was 100%, but
Yeah, on the back, I mean, there's been, over 40 vintages now, so I'd have to look back, but I would believe that some of the original vintages were 100% Cabernet.
Okay.
Like, it was when it was all Chabot, but yeah.
And for the other person who asked this question out there, I believe Bancroft Ranch is about 89 acres. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's in that ballpark, yeah.
About 89 acres there. Beringer owns some of the vineyards and also leases vineyards, correct?
Yeah.
For private reserve, or the vineyard?
That's correct. Yeah. In the case of Bancroft, obviously we don't own that vineyard. It's owned by the Bancroft family. Their primary business is actually making a treat that we all get to enjoy this time of year called almond roca. If you ever see those fancy candies in the foil that you usually buy at the airport, but it's a local thing. That's their main business. So they lease the whole property to us. We farm it, we plant it, we harvest it, we do all of it. So it's a great situation for both parties. And that's not uncommon in our portfolio. So we have a lot of these long-term leases that could be 30 years or more. But of course, like the home ranch right here where I am in Santa Elena, we own it, have owned it since 1875. So
amazing. Okay, I'll let you get back to the difficulty or the challenges with 2017. Not difficult.
I thought you were going to forget and just skip on that one.
No. I think that this is an easier question to answer before we get to that. But as it pertains to long-term vineyard lease contracts, do we pay the same price for fruit in a difficult vintage as in a Goldilocks vintage?
Yes. Short answer. The prices are pretty much set in advance. There's a caveat though. So if you look at, the contracts, the way most of them are written, they're written off of averages, or the average price per ton within counties or regions. That's most typical, or you have a pre-negotiated price with the grower before the vintage begins. Now that could change. We've had some really crazy vintages with wildfires and things like that. So things can be renegotiated in case where maybe a contract becomes null and void due to circumstances that are beyond our control. And many times we try to go back to a grower and say, well, rather than just say, no, we're not going to take anything. What if we lowered the price? And then we try to work with it because it might make a lower tier wine. We try to work with our partner growers because they're extremely important to us. We know that we're their livelihood. And we couldn't do it without them. So we have to work together. So it's
negotiated.
Yeah, certainly in the last 4 years, we've probably seen more of that than ever before. Maybe 2011, I think I saw a lot of that when I was at Artesa. It was a tough vintage.
So 2017, I know there was a lot of fire activity. I recall the fires kind of starting a little bit later in the season than normal, but it was a warmer year. Other than that, what were other specific challenges with 2017? The resulting wine is quite beautiful. So
yeah, 2017, it started out just fine. It was actually a pretty normal vintage, but right around Labor Day, which is not unusual, we got a significant heat wave. But the one in 2017 was really, really bad. It was temperatures over 110 for extended periods of time. We saw humidities in single digits. Luckily, most of the fruit was in an early stage. Usually the beginning of September, we're just kind of getting through veraison in the red varieties, but some of the white grapes got really accelerated, especially like Chardonnay in a warmer area like we had at Gamble. It ripened up super fast. So we had this real spastic pick frenzy, and the tanks kind of filled up, and but then it kind of stopped because that heat wave ended, it cooled back down, and we had this lag And we were really cruising at that point. The Cabernets were looking really good, all the Bordeaux varieties. And we were really well into them. In fact, everything from St. Helena, Chabot, all of those were picked. And then it was October 8th, Sunday, October 8th, that the fires broke out. Sticks in your mind when you have a date like that. Mm-hmm. And it kind of changed the landscape of things. I mean, those fires were all around us. We had them in Alice Peak. We had them over on the Mayacamas side in Glen Ellen, and up over the hill, came over towards Mount Veeder. In fact, the Lamperti vineyard was severely damaged in 17. And then, of course, we had up in Calistoga, the Nuns fire, the Tubbs fire, which went all the way up over into Santa Rosa. So, we didn't have a whole lot of impact from direct fire. It was mostly smoke drift, of course. But there was some grapes we had to reject. There was certainly some stuff that had some smoke taint, but we got so much good stuff in. We were about 90% done when the fires broke out that we were certainly capable of making the 2017 private reserve to the quality that we would expect, just maybe a little bit less than we would have liked to.
Yeah, it's outstanding. I mean, if I compare it to the 16, I would say the 16 just has that little extra kind of cooler vintage style to it, maybe just a little bit lighter in the acidity or higher in the acidity, a little bit more restrained. And then this has a lot of real power and great depth of fruit, like really, really dark fruit characters. Okay, this is probably there might be a long answer, but you can give us a short one because we only have 12 minutes. But what depth does the soil moisture monitor, do the soil moisture monitors reach? With concerns of increasing droughts, is it possible to not use irrigation on the mountain sites or valley? How would that affect the vines and the wines?
That's a tough one.
These are some pretty intense questions we're getting here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different means of monitoring moisture. There's the old school, neutron probes that we would drop down into the ground and take a reading. There's some more modern equipment we have out there. In fact, we have quite a bit of them being deployed, especially at our new borrow pit, which is a real rocky, very strained soil. We have this exact measuring tool that can actually show us how much the vines are actually taking out of the ground, not just how much is in the ground. So we can really be much more accurate with our watering, because the key is we want to stress the vine, but we don't want to kill the vine. It also allows us to save resources, because if we're not putting extra water out there that's not necessary, it's far better for us long term. And we're using drip irrigation anyway. We're putting it right to the source. So we're putting down a pretty minute amount of water compared to most agriculture. And then there's the old pressure bomb too, which we can use towards harvest when we actually take the leaf material and check the moisture there. So there's a lot of means that we can use to accurately read that, but the new technology is pretty fascinating.
Okay, and then lastly, I think we have time for one more question. How do farming and planting practices for wine designated for private reserve differ when looking at the valley floor versus mountain fruit?
I'm sorry, I broke up there. Can you just repeat that real quick?
Yeah, how do farming and planting practices for wine designated for private reserve differ when you're looking at the valley floor versus mountain fruit? I mean, the blocks that you're getting are pretty consistent year in and year out. You know essentially what's going to go into private reserve, right? I mean,
I mean, we do try to figure that out in advance. It doesn't always work out the way that you would hope, but being that we've been making this wine for so long and pretty traditionally with the same areas, we know which blocks are the better blocks. And so they do get what we would call A grade farming, right? We have A's, we have B's, we have C's. Some vineyards, some blocks are going to get farmed for A grade. The goal there is to make a wine of private reserve caliber. So it's going to get extra passes. We can afford to take more hand crews out there, maybe hand harvesting as well. And all the way through to barrels and everything else as well. If we're looking at B or even C grade, you might put more crop on, because then the goal might be to get more quantity over quality. And that balances out your ability to do A grade, right? I mean, that's the beauty of it, is one helps the other, to be able to kind of balance out your whole financials of the situation. So we do kind of know what those blocks are. They don't always make it the way we expect them to, and some blocks surprise you. So, and we get new vineyards in the portfolio now and then. It's like Borrow Pit that just adds another layer of complexity and new exciting things to work with.
It's great. And you're always tweaking it, always fine tuning it, just trying to put out the very best wine. A wine that I think is very, very unique to Napa Valley and the world for that matter. I can answer this question, Megan. It's about sustainability, and all of our vineyards are sustainably farmed. But Mark, what does that mean to you, just in terms of, does it make a better wine?
Well, I think it can help. I think more importantly, it makes a better planet, and I think that's really the key is that, I'm fifth generation here in Napa Valley. My daughters are the sixth generation. I always use that parks and recreation type philosophy that let's try to, leave everything as good or better than we found it. And I think that's really our goal. I think maybe some generations prior to us did not look at it that way. And now we maybe have to pay the price, maybe work a little bit harder in order to make up for that.
Yeah. Or maybe they just didn't understand what, and I do feel like Napa Valley is at the forefront of sustainability efforts, in this country. Like, it's pretty amazing that they will actually go to wineries and pay for them to have the training and put the practices in place. So, it's not like they're just leaving it up to each individual winery or wine grower. They are actually going in and giving them the tools and the programs that they need, which is, I think, really incredible.
Yeah, we've really been at the forefront of that. Our energy savings projects with our cooling and heating systems with our tanks. We've pioneered some new types of pulse cooling systems and things like that. We've got one of the largest solar complexes in all of Napa County. And we have a water capture system that captures rainwater off the roofs. Those solar panels actually direct the rainwater to stainless steel gutters. That water is captured. It's settled, filtered, and then we use that water for our cooling towers and for cleaning. So we're trying to make our footprint as small as we can.
Thank you so much. And Lars, I don't know about you. How's your wine opening up?
Oh my goodness. I told you I opened this couple of hours before we started, let it open up in the glass, and it's just been getting better and better with every sip. I've been getting better and better with every sip of it as well.
You have. Mark's always been great and doesn't even have the wine with him today. That's
impressive.
Our part, Mark. I'm so sorry.
Plenty of wine today.
I owe you a French dip at the Rutherford Grill for sure.
I'll take
Congratulations, Mark. Beautiful wine.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Such a gorgeous wine. And
thanks for sharing your points with us so eloquently as well.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Who better to continue this great history of Beringer, and it's just I think more and more people want to gravitate towards those stories and the history behind things. And you paint that picture for us very well, obviously, being a descendant. And I love the stories of you working for another wine company and driving by those family vineyards going,
I was scouting it out.
I also remember you saying at one point in time that you actually had to interview for your job.
Well, yeah, it wasn't exactly one of those you pick up on winejobs.com. It didn't hit the papers. I don't think they had a headhunter involved. It was one of those things where it was almost a joke. I threw a resume at Beringer for an associate winemaker position that was posted. And I must have stirred the beehive a little bit. But I know that Lori was actually looking for somebody that could eventually replace her for 30 years with the company. And I guess once I came in the door, things started to actually make sense to them. And I actually interviewed 7 times for this role.
Wow.
With different people, of course, around the different company, between PR, marketing, sales, viticulture, winemaking.
So nobody can say it was nepotism.
No, they didn't just hand it to me. There was no sword in the stone, if you will.
Well, what an
Well done,
incredible thrill. I mean, every day that I can start the day off with some delicious Beringer Private Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, I'm a happy girl. And I want to thank you so much, Mark, for all of your insights. Like I said, I learn something new every time I hear you speak to this wine and to Beringer and its legacy here in the Valley. I think I'm going to let Lars close it up. But before I do, I just want to say to everyone viewing, thank you so much for participating today. Thank you for keeping this program alive. We love it. It's going to extend into the new year, which we'll talk about in a second. And I just hope that everybody has an amazing holiday filled with good wine, good food, and loved ones. And be safe. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lars to introduce our next session and give you all of the details on how you can win some money today. Yay. Thank you, Lars.
Huzzah. Thank you, Jillian, very much. And thank you, Mark. Compliments to you both. The Beringer, beautiful wine. Thank everybody here for joining us today. We had a great time. Hope you enjoyed what we had to share with you as much as we enjoyed sharing it with you. And again, thanks to the Somm Journal, SommFoundation, and Treasury Wine Estates in Beringer. So we all have a little assignment with us now. We have a checklist to take with us. So number one, job one today, take the quiz. It will be opening shortly. The quiz, the link is also being posted in chat by our dear colleague, Megan. So take the quiz. You can go online. Here's the link. You have a maximum, this is not easy, maximum of 5 minutes to complete the quiz. You get one attempt only, and you must get the most correct answers in the shortest amount of time. That's the judgment, that's the scale. And it must be completed by 12:30 p.m. PST, Pacific, today. So that means you've got a little while.
Yeah. Mark Beringer, you're not allowed to take the quiz, just so you know.
What about me, Jillian?
Nope, you're not. You're excluded too.
Keep trying. I ask every time. But the prizes are pretty good. You've got 3 $500 scholarships being offered. So that obviously for 3 different winners. And you will get 1 year access to the global diagram of wine through the SommFoundation. And your name gets thrown into the hat as a candidate for Crush Camp at the end of the year. So that'll be at harvest time. So that'll be something really, really fun. The next thing you have to do on your list is sign up for our next Somm session, because the first, it's where Bordeaux meets the Rhone, featuring Penfolds 389. That is the first 50 people that sign up for that link will get a bottle of wine to taste with Jillian and I, and maybe the winemaker. You never know. They seem to have a habit of making cameo appearances. So be sure to get on that. With the holiday rush, we wanted to open that registration process up right away so we can make sure your bottle doesn't get lost in the holiday rush. So that's it. Once again, I want to thank everybody and echo Jillian's thoughts about wishing you the happiest of holidays. We all need a little cheer this year for sure. We all need some good wine and family and friends. And it's nice that I have some ideas from these tastings about what to enjoy. So thank you all very much.
Well
Signing
said.
off. See you all next month, next Somm session. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.